Good afternoon, and thank you for joining our webinar, Trauma 101 for Families. My name is Sophia Lacretis, Project Coordinator for the Mental Health Association in New York State. Joining me today is Kathy Eckert, Mahaney's Regional Consultant. Today, members of our tech team will be providing support during this webinar and facilitating a Q&A at the end. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted on our website. In making the recording available, we will not be sharing the slides today. In the upper right corner of your screen, you will see something that looks like two boxes stacked on top of each other. The first box is an audio selection. If you prefer to join us by telephone, choose the telephone option. The call number will show up, and be sure to input the audio pin. All attendees will be placed in listen-only mode during the presentation. So that second box is where you can type and submit questions to us, including any problems you may be experiencing. The Mental Health Association in New York State, Inc. improves the lives of individuals, families, and communities by raising mental health awareness, ending stigma and discrimination, and promoting wellness and recovery. The School Mental Health Resource and Training Center was established by Mahaney's with funding from New York State to help schools implement the law requiring mental health instruction as a part of K-12 health curriculum. This webinar series is being provided by funding from the Mother Cabrini Health Foundation. So let's get started. Today's webinar is focused on providing a deeper understanding of trauma. We will start our conversation today by going over some general terminology and different kinds of trauma, acknowledging that this can be a very heavy topic. So we will be taking some time to mention some qualities that can also help us cope and get through traumatic events. After establishing an understanding, we will talk more about how we can help youth understand and process their own trauma. And finally, we will be ending with providing some resources that can further help your knowledge on trauma and provide some ideas on how to start the conversation with our children and youth. So diving right in, trauma can be defined as an individual's trauma resulting from an event, a series of events, or a set of circumstances experienced by an individual as harmful or threatening. So we can break this down in two different ways. Looking at trauma as an actual threat to self, or we can look at it as a perceived threat, which is something we think of as being a threat. So it's the thought and the actual action. An example of this could be the type of trauma we're experiencing right now as a nation. Maybe you haven't been personally affected by the COVID-19 outbreak or be a part of the African American community, but the actions surrounding these two current events can make you feel as if you could be negatively impacted by them. So talking about different types of trauma, we wanted to look just at a few different types. And we're also going to mention toxic stress, as this can be a result of unhealed trauma. So starting off with historical trauma, that refers to the cumulative emotional harm of an individual or generation caused by a traumatic experience or event. And I personally believe the time we're living in now and what we're seeing and experiencing is a result of historical trauma that us as a nation has not systemically addressed properly. We're living through the effects of African American historical trauma, and we are seeing that through the actions of protesting and advocacy efforts around the nation. So with acute and chronic trauma, we kind of lump them together. They're similarly looked at as in the physical health field, acute meaning a single incident that occurs, and chronic meaning a repetitive action or incident. So an example of an acute traumatic event would be like a car accident or living through a natural disaster. Whereas chronic trauma includes things like domestic violence, child abuse of any kind, physical, mental, sexual, as well as childhood neglect. And we oftentimes see this in our military personnel as well. Next is collective trauma, which refers to the psychological reaction to a traumatic event that infects an entire society. Again, we are seeing this in our society right now with COVID-19. We have children and youth who have been looking forward to milestone events at the end of every school year that they didn't get to experience or had to experience differently for the first time. And this might not be something we think about as trauma, but it's definitely something we need to keep in mind when supporting students in anticipation for the next school year. Complex trauma describes both the child's exposure to multiple traumatic events that are oftentimes invasive or interpersonal, as well as those wide range long-term effects of that exposure. So this would be described, multiple invasive traumatic events, again, like childhood or child abuse, neglect, those adverse childhood experiences we talk about, and community violence. And lastly, just wrapping up with mentioning toxic stress, as this can be a result of unhealed trauma. It's the body's response that occurs when someone experiences strong, frequent, or prolonged adversity. Examples include physical, emotional abuse, chronic neglect, caregiver substance misuse, or mental health issues. It sounds like a lot of the same examples we stated above, but the reason we're bringing this up is that if we don't learn practices like grounding and breathing techniques to help heal our trauma and reduce our body's response to it, this could be, the result could be a developmental setback in the growth of a child's brain. And at that, I'll give it to Kathy, and she'll lead us into that next and hopefully make a little bit more sense of it for you.
Thank you, Sophia, and thank you everybody for joining us today. It's really important as we begin to talk about trauma, we first take a look at the impact of trauma on the brain. As this webinar is only 30 minutes long and the brain is an incredibly complex organ, I only have time just to highlight a few parts. But first of all, the brain develops from the bottom up. The reptilian brain, or the brain stem, was the first part of the brain developed in the fetus, and its main objectives are for physical survival and the maintenance of our body. So for example, your heart rate, breathing, movement, your temperature, balance, circulation, those are all controlled by that reptilian brain. So if we move upward there to the limbic system, its main objective is the emotional response and memory formation. And it also helps us to connect events with feelings. Now, one of the main structures of the limbic system is the amygdala. It is an almond-shaped mass of cells buried deep in the brain, and it is the alarm system for our body to let us know when we're in danger. When this is triggered, it floods the brain with the hormone cortisol, and what that does is let the body know that something is going on, and it may need to, 1, prepare to fight, 2, take flight and run like the wind, 3, freeze. So that fight, flight, and freeze. And then the last to develop is that frontal cortex, or the thinking brain. And its goal is our learning, our language development, our abstract thinking, our cause and effect, and our goal setting, consequences. And this typically does not mature into mid to late 20s. So what role does trauma play on the developing brain? The short answer is it derails development. Exposure to chronic trauma and stress weakens the architecture of the brain. So the brain that thinks it is in constant danger, whether it be real or perceived, has trouble organizing itself. And this can manifest later, as Sophia said, as problems in paying attention, sitting still, following instructions, all of which are needed for learning. Pat Levitt, who's a PhD in neuroscience, said it best when she said, which is one of my favorite quotes, "Doing math is difficult when your brain is busy looking for the lion." A brain cannot develop age-appropriate milestones if it is always in that fight, flight, or freeze mode. So those hormones produced during trauma and stress also interfere with the development of those higher brain functions, such as reasoning and problem solving, the executive functions of our brain. So too much of that stress hormone can trigger stem cells to malfunction. But the brain has the ability or the plasticity to be easily molded. And this means the brain continues to change in response to repeated stimulation. Now, this plasticity can indicates both risk and opportunity in that trauma can negatively impact the brain, but on the other hand, corrective experiences can also repair that damage by creating new connections. Now, as Sophia had said earlier, the webinar is being recorded, and when we post that recording, we will also be posting links to resources. And one of those resources, if you want to try to explain the brain and how it works to, your youth or a child, there's a great video called the hand-brain model, which uses your hand to symbolize all these different parts of the brain. And he just explains it wonderfully to our younger folks. So I advise you and suggest maybe taking a look at it. So what we are looking for in children exposed to trauma are for signs of disruption or impairment in their developmental domains. So in that emotional domain, managing their emotions is huge. So they can be easily upset. They could have difficulty expressing their needs. They can become detached. They can have difficulty with that whole self-regulation of how they're feeling. Moving on to the behavioral, they may have poor impulse control. They can become aggressive. They can start utilizing some self-destructive behaviors, whether it be risk-taking, substance use, or an eating disorder. They can become aggressive. They can, and in the social aspect, they can start withdrawing from their friends. They can start pushing people away, having trust issues, difficulty in setting up or respecting boundaries. They can have low self-esteem. They can feel a tremendous amount of shame. They can have those feelings of guilt that may affect the way that they are and behave socially. They may be easily startled, jittery, and nervous, so they can quick to react. So as a supportive adult, what you are looking for is a change in your youth. So how do we talk about loss and trauma with our children? I will tell you that about 1.5 years ago, our family did experience a trauma. My husband, he is fine now, but he had a massive heart attack and went into cardiac arrest in front of my 17-year-old and I. So for me as a parent and what I do, what I learned was I needed to talk to him about this, and he was traumatized by the entire event. But what I found was, and things that helped me, was to be patient. I had to let him talk in his own terms now, and also let him use the language he wanted to use. So now is not the time to kind of question the language that they may use. Let them get it out and express it however they want to express it. We need to be good listeners and to be available and listen without judgment. We need to give them opportunity to express their thoughts and feelings. I know for me personally, I could not sit my son down and say, hey, let's have a conversation about this. It had to be on his terms. But what I did find was car rides, going for a walk, eating, were all helpful ways in which got him to kind of talk, because it was a roundabout way to have these conversations. They need a reassurance that they are safe. And it's important to acknowledge the fact and let them know that it's okay not to be okay, and that you'll get through this together. Limit the news and social media if possible. If it is continuing to have that negative impact, on your child, start limiting the social media and the TV. If you don't know what to say, we all don't know what to say. So say something. Talk to them, help them understand, let them know that it's okay to kind of continue on and to laugh and to have fun still. In the aftermath of that traumatic event. It's important to maintain routine. That return to normalcy will communicate the message that they are safe and life will go on. And lastly, it's that be supportive. And this may mean providing extra attention, to that youth, and really kind of being there for them and how they need us to be there. So how do we limit the effects of trauma on our youth? So neurologically, toxic hormones stay in the body for up to a month. So teaching and practicing mindfulness and grounding techniques will lower some of those reactions to trauma and help alleviate the toxic chemicals that are created by the traumatic event. So helping, So some examples are those grounding exercises Sophia had mentioned. One of them is 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So helping your youth or adolescent kind of say 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can smell, and 2 things you can touch, and 1 thing you can taste. But it's also important to kind of put in some mindfulness, things like deep breathing and coloring, anything that is a simple way to be present in an activity is mindfulness. Anything that we can do to kind of let our thoughts go while we focus at the task of hand. So when do you ask for help? Kind of what I feel and what's kind of out there in research is that if you're not feeling better after 6 weeks of a traumatic event, it's time to maybe talk to somebody. If you see that their functioning in school is going downward, that they're not able to do what they need to do, if they're experiencing those terrifying memories and nightmares and flashbacks, if they're having a difficult time in relating to friends and family and they're starting again to isolate, maybe not go out into public, don't want to go to school, don't want to participate in social events. And if your teen or child is experiencing suicidal thoughts, those are all times when you need to ask for help. Now, asking for help can be as simple as another trusted adult having a conversation. It can be a doctor, it could be your just general practitioner doctor, or it could be a mental health professional. It could be the school social worker or the guidance counselor. It can be a nurse. It can be a faith leader. Anybody that you find that will be supportive is a person that you can ask. So Sophia, do you want to talk a little bit about hope and recovery?
Sure. Thank you, Kathy. So yeah, that was a little bit much. It is a little bit heavy. So let's end on a little bit of a lighter note and talk about some resiliency and recovery. So resiliency can be defined as someone's ability to become happy, healthy, and strong again after a traumatic incident. Or as we like to look at it, that grit or that toughness that we build up over time. Resiliency can help process trauma, and research shows that being resilient helps us adapt to recover. It is worth mentioning, there are some people who are born with more resiliency than others. However, there are ways that these individuals can build their resiliency through those mindful techniques that Kathy was talking about. Over time, we learn to implement these coping skills into our everyday life, and it becomes like second nature to us. And that allows ourselves the ability to calm the body's response to stress down, and again, reducing that long-term effect of that toxic stress in the body overall. And I actually found myself the other day talking to a friend about another friend's new home. The way I described it, it actually made me feel calm in the moment. Talking about the beautiful rolling country hills and her cute little garden, I felt instantly calm. And it shows over time that it is possible to create those tools as second nature. We also have a few activities on our website that help with mindful techniques. Some of the examples are creating mindful stones, soothing bracelets, as well as just taking a moment to connect in nature. We have a cool mindful nature hunt that you can engage in with the kiddos over the summer. There are also many apps and YouTube videos that walk you through breathing techniques and guided meditation. And I know here at the Mental Health Association, we are always sharing our favorite ones with each other at work. So lastly, I'll just touch a little on recovery. It is defined as the process of change to improve one's health and wellness. And some things that play a big part in your recovery are those protective factors. And we categorize those into individual, family, and community. So some individual protective factors can be your self-advocacy, self-awareness, building those coping strategies into everyday living experiences, and the education and spirituality you allow yourself to engage in. Family, again, Kathy brought this up, having supportive parents, other adults, aunts, uncles, cousins, really anybody in your family or surrounding, neighborhood or community that makes you feel comfortable and heard. And then with that being said, looking into the community, continuing and supporting students through positive school connections, through teachers, coaches, and other support staff, as well as community mentors in different clubs, Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts. So lastly, just really quick, because I think this is very, very important, always remember to be nice to yourself. There is, this is definitely easier said than done. I have to personally remind myself a lot. I don't know about you, Kathy, but we as individuals, our community, our nation, we've been battling a lot of negativity with all the events that have ensued this year. And we just have to we have to remember to take time and be nice to ourselves. So keeping that in mind, it's especially important when we show up to support our children and youth through their own trauma. Another thing we always advocate for is being the best you can be. And that is super important, so we can be there for the others that need us. All right, so with that being said, we would like to thank everybody for joining us today. We hope this was helpful and informative. And it looks like we have about 5 minutes or so for some questions. So Kathy, would you like to answer some questions for us or read them out to us?
Yeah, let me look here and I'll grab one. So here's one. It says, my son and daughter had a different response to a recent trauma. My daughter doesn't want to talk. My son is very expressive and sometimes very angry. Why are their reactions completely different? And how can I make sure I'm there for them in the best way possible? You got anything on that?
Yeah, actually, it's interesting. As I was looking into more, how to support ourselves, how to support our community, I was actually reading a research publication from SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration. And it was talking about how survivors' immediate reaction to the aftermath of trauma is quite complicated, and it's affected by their own experiences. And again, those perceived experiences. So when it comes to our youth, what your daughter may be seeing on social media or what she's being spoken about may be different than what your son has seen on his social media, and again what he's learning about, because I think those social media outlets are very driven to who we are as people, and humans are very different, and I'm sure the different people they follow on those social media platforms are saying a multitude of different things. So that certainly plays a role in what your daughter is seeing and how she's reacting to it versus what your son is seeing and what he's reacting to it. I'll touch one last note that they said that coping styles can vary from action-oriented to emotionally expressive, or in your daughter's case, not emotionally expressive. So Kathy, I know being a mom, I'm a cat mom, but our animals don't need us as much as our children. Do you have any advice or any input?
Well, I do. I mean, obviously, having just experienced that, I do have that 17-year-old, but I also have 2 other children. And what I found just from that recent trauma experience that we had was really how different all three of my children handled that, as well as myself. I, for one, needed to tell everybody. I needed to talk about it. I needed to tell the whole story from the beginning to the end. My son, on the other hand, just kind of wanted to push it away, but it would bubble up and he'd talk about it and then he'd push it away. I don't want to talk about it anymore. And then it would bubble back up again and he would talk about it and then it would come back down again. But my daughter had a completely different reaction to it. She wanted it to be just about the 5 of us in our family. She did not want to hear me talking about it. She did not want to have everybody to know about it. She wanted it to be more inward and personal. So, and then my third son, who is not in town, so he didn't firsthand experience all this, was kind of like, okay, great, I'm glad he's fine, and was like, talk to you later. So I think it depends on every child, and everybody is different, and everybody handles different traumas and stressors differently. So I think that all we can do is just support them the way they individually need to be supported. And that's my best advice, is just supporting them however they need to be supported. So it looks like we have one more question here, or we have time for one more question. Can you talk more about the corrective action to fix the damage caused by the developing brain and trauma? Do you have anything on that, Sophia, or do you want?
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking, I'm thinking it as a neuroplasticity way, and I actually went to a conference that explained, Kathy, that that malleability in our brain that you were talking about in simple terms. She compared it to a tree, and if we want to shape it some way, or in my case, if I want to see tomatoes and cucumbers in the garden, you have to prune those other leaves that are just going to suck the energy from the positive, the fruit or the tomato that's coming from the tree. So I look at it that way, and it really does help me. If we kind of prune those negative behaviors that could be, learned behaviors over time, and kind of reverse the action and put something more positive into that, then we can get a beautiful cucumber or a beautiful tomato instead of just a big overgrown bush.
Oh, that's a good analogy of that. And and I will say that anytime you can add those protective factors, and be strength-based and find the strengths that are going on within yourself and within your, within our youth and within our families, you continue to kind of grow and build on those pathways, so they can be changed. And it involves changing our thoughts. And I think that over time, with practice, with mindfulness, with grounding, with information, with education, with support, are all ways that we can increase and build those pathways to take a different direction, and become stronger, more resilient people. So I think that's all the time we have. It is 1:30 at this moment. Sophia and I thank you very, very much for joining us today. This was just your basic 101 overview. And we hope that you kind of got something out of it. And please let us know if you have any other questions or thoughts or concerns. And thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.